I want to tell you about the morning I made my husband's favorite breakfast and set it on the table and stood in my kitchen in Racine, Wisconsin, waiting for a man who was never going to walk through that door again. Not because he was dead, because he had somewhere else to be, someone else to be. And I had spent 14 years of my life not knowing that the man sleeping next to me every night had built an entirely different life in the space between his lies. My name is Claire Whitmore. I am 44 years old. I teach English literature at a high school on the north side of Racine, the kind of job where you spend your days trying to convince teenagers that the words on a page can tell you something true about the world. I have thought about that irony more times than I can count. I have a house on a quiet street 3 blocks from Lake Michigan. A rescue dog named Pepper who sleeps at the foot of the bed and snores like a much larger animal. A vegetable garden I am moderately serious about. A book club that meets every third Thursday and drinks more wine than it discusses literature. I had a husband named Derek Whitmore, 47 years old, 6'1", dark hair going silver at the temples in a way that I always thought made him look distinguished. Sales director for a medical supply company, a job that required, he always explained, a significant amount of travel, conferences, client visits, regional meetings in cities I had never been to and never thought to question. I want to sit with that sentence for a moment. Cities I had never been to and never thought to question. 14 years. Married 11 of them. And in all that time, I had never once driven to a conference hotel to surprise him. Never once showed up unannounced at a client dinner. Never once felt the specific, creeping suspicion that the travel itself, all of it, the frequency, the duration, the destinations was the point. Travel was always the point. I understand that now. Derek disappeared on a Tuesday. October. The kind of Racine October where the wind off Lake Michigan has real teeth in it, the kind of cold that gets inside your coat no matter how well you've buttoned it. He left for work at his usual time, 7:40 in the morning. Kissed me on the cheek. Took his travel bag from the hall closet, which I noticed, but didn't register as unusual because he traveled so often the bag coming out barely made an impression anymore. I've got the Midwest Regional Conference, he said. Milwaukee. Back Thursday. Thursday, I said. I was making coffee. I didn't look up. I have replayed that moment so many times. I didn't look up. Thursday came. Derek did not. I texted him at 6 p.m. Hey, are you on your way? 3 dots appeared. Then, running behind. Client dinner ran long. Tomorrow morning. I made dinner for 1. I gave Pepper an extra treat because she had been waiting by the door since 5. I watched television and went to bed. Friday morning came. No Derek. I called. Voicemail. I texted again. Derek, where are you? 2 hours later. Sorry, conference extended. Monday latest. I'll explain everything. I'll explain everything. That sentence. Right there. That was the first real signal. The first moment something beneath the surface of my ordinary life shifted in a way I couldn't quite name yet. Because Derek had traveled hundreds of times in 14 years together, and not once had he sent me a sentence that needed to come with an explanation attached. Normal people don't preemptively offer to explain themselves. I put my phone down. I stood at my kitchen window and watched the lake in the distance, gray and restless, and I told myself, it's fine. He's just busy. He'll be home Monday. Monday came. No Derek. By day 6 I had called his office. His assistant, a young woman named Trish who had always been warm and efficient in the 3 or 4 times I had spoken to her, answered on the second ring.
Hi Claire, she said.
Her voice was, and this is the word I keep coming back to, careful. Not warm. Not efficient. Careful. Trish, I said. Is Derek in? He's not answering his cell. A pause that lasted exactly 1 beat too long. He's been out of office this week, she said. Working remotely on a project. I can pass along a message if you'd like. Working remotely. Trish, I said carefully. What conference was he at last week? The Midwest Regional? Another pause. I'm not sure which one you mean, she said. We have a few things scheduled this quarter. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. There was no Midwest Regional Conference. I knew it the way you know things that you don't want to know. Not with evidence yet, not with proof, but with the particular bodily certainty that arrives before the mind catches up. My hands were cold. The kitchen felt too quiet. Pepper had stopped waiting by the door and was watching me from across the room with her head tilted sideways. "I know," I said to her. She kept watching me. Day 8, I called his mother in Green Bay. Eleanor Whitmore was 72, sharp as a tack, and had never particularly warmed to me in 11 years of marriage, which I had always attributed to the particular territorial instinct some mothers have about their sons. I called her anyway because I was running out of options, and because, whatever Eleanor's feelings about me, she loved Derek completely. "Claire," she said when she answered. Her voice was flat. "Eleanor," I said. "I'm sorry to call out of the blue. I haven't been able to reach Derek, and I'm starting to get worried." "Have you spoken to him?" Silence. Not the silence of someone thinking. The silence of someone deciding. "He called me last week," she said finally. "He said he needed some time."
Some time.
"Time for what?"
I asked.
My voice came out steadier than I felt. He didn't say. Another pause. "Claire, I think you should wait for him to come home and have that conversation directly." Something cold moved through me. "Eleanor," I said slowly, "do you know where he is?" The longest pause yet. "I think," she said carefully, "that Derek needs to tell you some things himself." She knew. His mother knew. And whatever she knew, she had known long enough that she had already decided which side of it she was standing on. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat in my house 3 blocks from Lake Michigan, and I counted backwards. 14 years together. 11 married. How many conferences? How many client dinners? How many Tuesday mornings where he kissed me on the cheek and took his travel bag from the hall closet and said he'd be back Thursday? How many Thursdays had he spent somewhere I didn't know existed? He came home on day 11. A Sunday evening. The kind of Racine sunset that turns the lake copper and rose and makes the whole city look briefly, impossibly beautiful. I heard his key in the lock at 6:23 p.m. I was sitting at the kitchen table. I had not turned the lights on as the room got dark, and I did not turn them on now. He opened the door. Saw me sitting in the near dark. Something moved across his face. Not guilt. Not quite. Something more complicated and less clean than guilt.
"Claire," he said.
"Sit down," I said. He sat. "Where were you?" I asked. He put his hands flat on the table. I looked at them. "It's complicated," he said. "Try," I said. He looked up at me. And I saw it, whatever he had been carrying for however long he had been carrying it, sitting right there on his face, right on the surface, right where I could finally see it. "I was dealing with a situation," he said. "A personal situation.
I should have told you I needed some time."
I handled it badly, and I'm sorry. A situation. I looked at my husband of 11 years. He's rehearsed this, I thought. He's been rehearsing this for days. "Derek," I said quietly, "that's the 3rd different explanation you've given me in 11 days. He said nothing. "Milwaukee," I said. Then a client project. Then personal time. I paused. Which one is true? The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, somewhere down toward the lake, a car horn sounded and faded. Derek Whitmore looked at his wife for a long moment. And then he said the 4 words that took 14 years of my life and turned them into something I no longer recognized. "There's someone else," he said. The room did not spin. The floor did not drop. Nothing dramatic happened. I just sat there in the dark kitchen of my house 3 blocks from Lake Michigan and felt the specific, devastating weight of a truth that had been true for a very long time, and that I had been the last person on earth to know. How long, I thought. How long? How long? How long? There's someone else. 3 words. I sat with them in the dark kitchen for what felt like a very long time, but was probably 30 seconds. 30 seconds during which Derek sat across from me with his hands flat on the table and his eyes doing something complicated, something that moved between guilt and relief in a way that told me he had been waiting to say those words for longer than I wanted to calculate.
"How long?" I said.
Not a question. A demand. "Claire." "How long, Derek?" He looked at the table.
7 years, he said.
The number landed like something physical. 7 years. We had been married 11, which meant that 4 years into our marriage, 4 years in when I was 37 and we were talking about whether to try for children, and I was reorganizing the spare bedroom in my head and thinking about names, Derek Whitmore had met someone else and decided, quietly, privately, without a single word to me, to keep both.
7 years, I said.
Yes. Does she know about me? The pause before he answered was its own answer. Yes, he said. I stood up. Not dramatically. I just needed to not be sitting across from him anymore. I walked to the kitchen window and stood there looking out at the dark street and the distant suggestion of the lake, and I breathed.
In, out, in, out.
Don't fall apart yet, I told myself. You need information. Fall apart later. Get information now. Children? I asked. My voice was steady.
I don't know how.
The longest pause yet. A daughter, he said. She's 6. I want to tell you what happened inside me when he said that. Nothing. That's the honest answer. In that specific moment, standing at my kitchen window in the dark, Pepper pressed against my left leg, Derek behind me at the table, I felt absolutely nothing. Not rage. Not grief. Not the volcanic, floor-dropping devastation you might expect. Just nothing. A vast, white, completely empty nothing. I understand now that this is what shock actually feels like. Not the movie version, not collapsing, not screaming, not the dramatic fall. The real version is silence. A silence so complete it feels like your nervous system simply refusing to process any further input until it is caught up with the last thing. I turned around. Where? I said. What? Where does she live? Derek looked at me with something that might have been wariness. Appleton, he said. 90 miles north of Racine. 90 miles. He had driven 90 miles every time he kissed me on the cheek and took his travel bag from the hall closet and told me he had a conference. Every Thursday, he didn't come home. Every extended client dinner. Every regional meeting in a city I never thought to question. 90 miles. I could drive there in under 2 hours. Get out, I said. Claire. Not permanently, I said. My voice was completely flat.
Tonight.
Get out tonight. I need you out of this house while I think. He left without arguing. That told me something too. A man with a clear conscience argues. A man carrying 7 years of carefully managed deception knows exactly when he has run out of room.
The door closed.
Pepper looked at the door. Then at me. I sat back down at the kitchen table in the dark. And then, finally, privately, with no one watching, I fell apart. I gave myself one night. That was the deal I made with myself somewhere around 2 a.m. when the crying had run its course, and what was left was something harder and colder and more purposeful. One night to fall apart. One night to grieve the marriage, the 14 years, the future I had been living inside my own head. The children we never had, which felt, right now, like the one mercy in this entire situation. The holidays. Sunday mornings. The 1,000 ordinary moments that I now had to go back and re-examine through an entirely different lens. One night. Then I was going to need to be somebody else. Not the English teacher who waited by the door. Not the wife who didn't look up when he took his travel bag. Someone new. Someone with her eyes open all the way. At 6 a.m. I made coffee. At 6:15 I opened my laptop. I typed in, Appleton, Wisconsin family law attorney. Her name was Sandra Okafor. Family law attorney. 12 years of practice. Office on Appleton Street in Racine, which I took as either a coincidence or a sign depending on how you feel about that kind of thing. I called at 8:01 a.m., the moment the office opened. Her assistant gave me an appointment for Thursday. I spent the next 3 days preparing for that appointment the way I had spent my adult life preparing for things that mattered, methodically, completely, without leaving anything to chance. I pulled 14 years of financial records. Every joint account. Every credit card statement. Every tax return. Every mortgage document. I had always been the one who managed our finances. Derek was good at earning money and largely indifferent to the administrative reality of it, which had always suited me and which I now understood suited him for an entirely different reason. He needed someone managing the official money so he could move the other money without scrutiny. Because there was other money. I found it on day 2. A checking account I had never seen. Not in both our names, in Derek's name alone, at a bank we had never used together, with a debit card I had never known existed. The statements went back 9 years, which meant he had opened it 2 years before the relationship in Appleton began. He had been planning this before he even met her. The account had regular transfers in, small enough individually to not trigger automatic alerts, large enough collectively to matter. Grocery runs, a car payment, a lease agreement for an apartment in Appleton that showed up in the transaction history like a splinter, small, precise, impossible to ignore once you saw it. He had been paying for 2 households, with money we had both earned. I wrote that down on a legal pad and underlined it 3 times. Sandra Okafor was exactly what I needed her to be.
40-something. Precise.
The kind of attorney who listens to everything before she says anything, and then says exactly the right thing without any wasted words. I sat across from her desk on Thursday morning, and I laid out everything I had found in 3 days of methodical, sleepless digging. The hidden account, the transfers, the apartment lease, the 7-year timeline, the child. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she picked up her pen. Wisconsin is a marital property state, she said. Everything acquired during the marriage belongs equally to both parties. The money he moved into that account, if it came from joint income or marital assets, is recoverable. She paused. The apartment lease payments constitute dissipation of marital assets. That works in your favor, significantly. How significantly? I asked. Significantly enough, she said, that he's going to wish he had handled this very differently. Good, I thought. What do I do right now? I asked. Right now, she said, you do nothing visible. You let him believe this is a simple dissolution. You do not confront him about the hidden account. You do not tell him what you found. You give me 2 weeks to file the initial documentation and get the financial forensics started. She looked at me steadily. Can you do that? I thought about the woman who had sat in a dark kitchen 11 days ago, not looking up when her husband took his travel bag. Yes, I said. I can do that. Derek called on Friday. He wanted to talk. He used words like explain and context and complicated. He said he had never meant to hurt me. He said the situation had grown beyond what he'd anticipated. He said he wanted to handle this with maturity and mutual respect. Mutual respect. I sat on my couch with Pepper's head in my lap, and I listened to every word, and I said almost nothing, and I kept my voice completely even. Because Sandra Okafor had said, do nothing visible. So I did nothing visible. I need more time to process, I told Derek. Let's talk next week. Of course, he said, relieved. I could hear it clearly, the specific relief of a man who believes the person across from him is too hurt to be strategic. He did not know me at all. He never had. I drove to Appleton on a Saturday, not to confront anyone, not to knock on a door or stand on a lawn or insert myself into a scene I hadn't scripted. I drove there because I needed to see it. I needed the information to be real and physical and not just numbers on a bank statement and dates on a lease agreement. I found an apartment complex on the east side of the city. A decent building, clean, maintained, the kind of place that costs enough to suggest stability without suggesting excess. Derek's car was not in the parking lot. I sat across the street for 20 minutes, and then a woman came out of the building. She was younger than me, mid-30s, dark hair and a ponytail, moving with the slightly distracted efficiency of someone managing more than one thing at once. She was holding the hand of a small girl, dark hair, Derek's nose, his jaw in miniature, who was skipping on the sidewalk with the complete physical abandon of a 6-year-old who has no idea that her world is built on something that was never fully real. I watched them walk to a car. Buckle in. Drive away. I sat there alone for a long time after they were gone.
She doesn't know either, I realized. Not all of it.
Not the real version. Because if Derek had told her the truth, the whole truth, the 14 years, the house in Racine, the wife who had no idea, she would not have stayed. Whatever story he had told her about me, it was a version carefully managed for her consumption. He had 2 women who believed they knew him.
Neither of us did.
I called the woman from Appleton on a Tuesday evening 2 weeks later. Her name was Melissa Strand. I had found her through the lease agreement. Her name was on it alongside Derek's, and from there through basic public records that Sandra Okafor had helped me navigate. I had her number for 4 days before I used it. I spent those 4 days thinking about whether this was the right move, what Sandra would say, what the consequences might be. Then I thought about that little girl skipping on the sidewalk. I called. She answered on the third ring. "Melissa," I said. "My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm Derek's wife."
A pause.
His legal wife. We've been married for 11 years and together for 14. Another pause. "I think there are things he has not told you, and I think you deserve to know them." Silence on the line. Long complete. Then, very quietly, "How long have you known about me?" 11 days, I said. "I've known about you for 7 years, she said. The floor shifted. "He told me you were separated," she said. Her voice had gone flat in the way voices go when a person is processing something that is rearranging everything in real time. "He said you had been for years. He said the divorce was complicated because of the house." The house. He had used my house as the reason he couldn't leave. My house. My mortgage. My name on the deed. "Melissa," I said carefully, "we were not separated. We have been living together as a married couple for 11 years. He has been traveling to Appleton and telling me it was for work." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. "He told me he was in sales," she finally said.
"He is," I said.
"He just never told you what else he was selling." We talked for 2 hours. By the end of it, we had compared timelines, cross-referenced dates, identified the specific lies he had told each of us to keep the other from becoming real. It was methodical and devastating and strangely clarifying. 2 women assembling the actual shape of a man neither of them had truly known. Melissa was not my enemy. She never had been. Derek had needed us to be, needed the threat of that confrontation to keep us both in separate boxes, each convinced we had something the other didn't. But sitting on the phone with her for 2 hours in my quiet Racine house with Pepper asleep beside me, I understood that we were the same. 2 women who had been managed and compartmentalized and handed carefully edited versions of a man who had never been fully present in either place. At the end of the call, she said, "What are you going to do?" "Everything I'm legally entitled to," I said. "And I think you should do the same." A pause. "I have a daughter," she said quietly. "I know," I said. "That's why I called." He had a child he was hiding from his wife. He had a wife he was hiding from a child. Both of them deserved better than the version of Derek Whitmore they had been given. And I was going to make sure they got it. I called Melissa Carr on a Friday morning. Not impulsively. Not emotionally. I had spent 4 days discussing it with Sandra, turning it over from every angle, weighing the risk against the necessity until I was certain, completely certain, that what I was about to do was not revenge dressed up as justice, but actual, legitimate, necessary truth. Sandra had given me clear parameters. What I could say, what I couldn't, what would help the case, and what would hand Derek's attorney a weapon to use against me. I memorized those parameters like a script. Then I picked up the phone and called the woman my husband had been funding in Appleton for 4 years. She answered on the third ring. "Hello." Her voice was younger than I expected. Slightly breathless, the way mothers of toddlers always sound, permanently halfway through something else. "Melissa," I said. "My name is Claire Whitmore. I am Derek's wife." Complete silence. Not the silence of someone who didn't know I existed. The silence of someone who had known this call was coming eventually and had never figured out what they would say when it arrived. "I'm not calling to fight with you," I said. "I'm calling because I have information about Derek that I believe you don't have. And I think you deserve to have it." A long pause. Then, very quietly, "What kind of information?" "Financial," I said. "Specifically, what he has been doing with money, where it has been going, and where it hasn't been going." Another pause. "I'm listening," she said. We talked for 2 hours. I told her everything Paul Garrett had found. The redirected commissions, the hidden account, the $63,000 that had quietly left my marriage. I told her about the 3 payments of $5,000, the ones made to her account 8 months apart, And I watched the silence on the other end of the line change quality as she understood what those payments actually represented. Not love. Not partnership. Not a man contributing to the life of his child. Management payments. Calculated, intermittent, just enough to maintain stability without creating dependency. Just enough to keep her from looking too closely at the bigger picture. He told me he had a savings account he was building for Ava, she said. Her voice had gone very flat. For her college fund. He said he was putting money away every month.
Ava.
The little girl in the paper crown. There is no college fund, I said carefully. There is a hidden account. But the money in it has been earmarked in his financial disclosures for the divorce as a personal asset predating our marriage.
He's trying to keep it, she said. He's trying to keep all of it, I said.
From both of us. The silence that followed was the sound of a woman reorganizing everything she thought she understood about her life. I knew that silence intimately. Melissa, I said. I have an attorney. She is very good. And what we are building, the financial documentation, the asset records, the evidence of concealment, is strong enough to affect not just my divorce settlement, but any family court proceedings related to Ava's support. A pause. What are you saying? She asked. I'm saying that Derek Whitmore has been managing two women simultaneously and skimming from both arrangements to fund a hidden account he intended to walk away with. I paused. And I'm saying that if you get your own attorney and we share what we each have, he walks away with nothing. The longest pause yet. Then Melissa Carr said something I did not expect. He told me you were cold, she said quietly. He said you were distant, that the marriage had been over for years emotionally. A breath. He said you wouldn't care. He said you wouldn't care. I sat with that for exactly as long as it deserved. He needed you to believe that, I said. The same way he needed me to believe the conferences were real. The story he told each of us was whatever kept each of us from looking too closely. Another silence. I have a daughter with him, she said. Not defensively.
Just as a fact.
The most complicated fact in her life. I know, I said. And Ava deserves financial security from her father. Real security. Not management payments. Not whatever he decides to hand over when it's convenient. I paused. That's another reason to do this correctly. I heard her exhale, long and slow. Give me your attorney's number, she said. Melissa retained an attorney within 48 hours. Her name was Karen Doyle, a family law specialist in Appleton who had, as it turned out, worked opposing counsel against Sandra Okafor twice before. Sandra told me they had a professional respect for each other that would make coordination clean and efficient. Within a week, the two legal teams were sharing documentation. Within 10 days, Derek Whitmore's attorney received a combined financial disclosure demand that covered every account, every asset, every transaction across the entire span of our marriage, including the hidden account, the redirected commissions, and the 3 management payments to Melissa that his attorney had apparently not been told about. I know this because Sandra told me Derek's attorney called her directly and asked for a settlement conversation. His attorney didn't know about Melissa, Sandra said. He found out when we sent the combined disclosure demand. He was not pleased. I imagine he wasn't. Derek called me on a Tuesday evening. I almost didn't answer. I looked at his name on the screen for 4 full rings and thought about every Tuesday evening of the past 14 years, the ordinary, unremarkable Tuesdays I had spent in this house believing I understood my own life. I answered. Claire. His voice was different from the last time I had heard it. The careful, rehearsed quality was gone. What was underneath it was something rawer and less composed. Something that might have been the first genuinely unscripted thing he had said to me in years. Derek, I said. You called her, he said. Not an accusation. Almost a statement of something inevitable. You called Melissa. I did, I said. Why? He asked. I thought about that question carefully. Not because the answer was complicated, but because I wanted to give him the true one. Because she deserved the same information I had, I said. And because Ava deserves a father who is held financially accountable whether he wants to be or not. Silence. You've destroyed everything, he said quietly. Derek, I said. You destroyed everything. 4 years ago. I'm just the one who documented it. I hung up. I set my phone down on the kitchen table. Pepper looked up at me from her spot by the door. "We're okay," I told her. She put her head back down. We were okay. The divorce settlement was finalized in February. Wisconsin is a marital property state, which meant that the $63,000 Derek had spent 3 years quietly moving into a hidden account was legally marital property. All of it. Every redirected commission. Every carefully timed transfer. All of it subject to equal division. Derek's attorney had spent 6 weeks trying to argue that the hidden account predated patterns attributable to the marriage. Paul Garrett spent those same 6 weeks demonstrating, transaction by transaction, that it did not.
Paul won.
The settlement gave me the house on the street 3 blocks from Lake Michigan. The joint retirement accounts, divided equitably with the hidden account factored into the calculation. A cash settlement that accounted for the financial damage of 3 years of concealed asset movement. Derek walked away with his car, his personal belongings, and a payment obligation to both his divorce settlement and Ava's formal child support arrangement, an arrangement established by Karen Doyle in Appleton Family Court with a specificity and enforceability that left Derek's attorney very little room to negotiate.
He did not get the hidden account.
Every dollar of it was redistributed through the settlement. He had spent 3 years building it. He walked away from it in a February courtroom in Racine, Wisconsin, on a gray Tuesday morning while I sat beside Sandra Okafor and watched his face as the judge confirmed the final figures.
He did not look at me.
I looked at him. I wanted to remember this, I thought. Not from cruelty. Just because I had spent 14 years not seeing him clearly, and I wanted to practice seeing him for what he actually was while I still had the opportunity. A man who had calculated everything and been outcalculated. A man who had managed 2 women simultaneously and been undone by the moment they stopped being separate and became coordinated. A man who had looked at the steadiness of my life, my house, my career, my reliable Jeep and my book club and my slightly overgrown garden, and decided that steadiness meant inattention. He had confused contentment with blindness. That was his fundamental mistake. I met Melissa in person for the first time in March. We had spoken on the phone a dozen times by then. We had shared attorneys and documentation and the specific, strange intimacy of 2 people dismantling the same lie from different sides. But we had not been in the same room. She drove down from Appleton on a Saturday morning. She knocked on my front door at 11 o'clock. She was smaller than I expected. Dark hair, like her photographs. Tired around the eyes in the way that single mothers of 3-year-olds are tired, not defeated, just continuously running on something other than adequate sleep. She had Ava with her. The little girl from the photograph. The paper crown birthday girl. She was holding her mother's hand and looking up at me with Derek's dark eyes and her mother's open face, and I felt something move through me that was not simple and not clean but was real. This child did not choose any of this. Not one moment of it. "Hi," I said, crouching down to Ava's level. "I like your jacket." Ava looked at her jacket, bright yellow, covered in small printed ducks, and then back at me with the absolute seriousness of a 3-year-old considering a compliment. "It has ducks," she said. "It has a lot of ducks," I agreed. She nodded, satisfied, and looked away. Melissa looked at me over her daughter's head. Something passed between us. Not friendship exactly, not yet, maybe not ever, in any conventional sense. Something more specific than friendship. The particular understanding of 2 people who have stood in the same fire from different sides and come out of it knowing things about each other that most people never know about anyone. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for calling me." "You would have found out eventually," I said. "Maybe," she said, "but not in time." I thought about that word.
Time.
The asset Derek had stolen from both of us in different quantities and different ways. Neither of us could recover, but both of us were going to have to rebuild with what remained.
"Come in," I said.
I made coffee.
It is April now.
The lake is still cold, but the light has changed, longer, softer, the particular quality of Great Lakes spring light that makes everything look like it is in the process of deciding to be beautiful again. My garden is still technically winter bare, but I have already started planning what goes where. The tomatoes. The herbs along the south fence. The peonies that come back every year, whether I remember to tend them or not. I returned to my classroom in January and told my students we were going to spend the semester reading stories about people who survived things. Not heroes. Not people with extraordinary abilities or resources or luck. Just people who found out something true about the world, something hard and specific and permanent, and then figured out how to keep living inside it without letting it become the only thing that defined them. I think I needed to teach that as much as they needed to hear it. Derek Whitmore is renting an apartment in Green Bay now, near his mother. Which seems right. Eleanor, who knew and chose her side, can spend her remaining years watching her son manage the consequences of his own choices. He makes his child support payments on time. Karen Doyle made very sure of the mechanisms that would follow if he did not. He has not called me since Tuesday evening. I hung up the phone and told my dog we were okay. We are more than okay. I think about the morning I made his favorite breakfast and stood in my kitchen waiting for a man who was not coming home the way I thought he was. I think about the moment I sat in the dark kitchen with my hand flat on the table, feeling for something solid, and heard him say there's someone else in the same voice he had used for 14 years to say ordinary, unremarkable things. I think about the drive home from Sandra's office the day Paul Garrett told me about Ava. The silence in my car. The gray Racine streets. The number 3 is repeating in my head. And I think about a little girl in a yellow duck jacket standing on my front porch in March, looking up at me with her father's eyes and her mother's openness, completely unburdened by any of the history that had brought her to that door. She gets to be new, I thought. Whatever her father built and destroyed, she gets to be entirely new. That is the part that makes me believe in things again. Not in the way I believed before, the easy, unexamined faith of a woman who had never had real reason to look closely. Something harder and clearer and more durable than that. The faith of someone who looked directly at the worst of it and decided to stay anyway. Not for Derek. Not for marriage. Not for anything that had already been revealed as hollow. For the lake 3 blocks away. For Pepper sleeping at the foot of my bed. For the peonies coming back whether I tend them or not. For the students in my classroom who are learning that surviving something does not require you to be extraordinary. It just requires you to keep going. One Tuesday at a time. This is the end of today's story. If Claire's story hit you, drop a comment below. What moment broke you the most? And what would you have done the night he finally came home? Story 1 is coming next. And trust me, the mother-in-law who changed the locks has no idea what's coming for her.